Althea? Althea? Aspen entered Miss Lee's old dingy kitchen, the torch clutched tightly in her hand. With the light of the torch illuminating the room, it looked more ill-used and decrepit than before. The paint was flaking from the walls, and the floor was stained with dirty footsteps and clods of earth. Guiltily, Aspen wondered if some of those footprints had come from the soles of her own shoes. Definitely. The table where Miss Lee had sat when Aspen had first found her that cold January day was still there, sitting in the corner. So was Miss Lee's chair. Aspen shuddered. She turned her attention to the wooden drawers and cupboards that were dinted, and the kitchen counters which were covered in dust. Motes of dust swirled in the air, illuminated by the torch's orange glow. Aspen turned the light towards the old washing machine where Althea so often perched. But Althea wasn't there. She had vanished into thin air as though she had never existed. She hadn't even had the decency to leave behind a memento like the story of Cinderella. There was no glass slipper, or in this case, black flat. Her bag was gone too. Aspen supposed she still had Althea's torch, a large, round, bulky thing that seemed to swallow batteries. But what manner of memento was that? She could hardly display it in her bedroom. Parents would see it, and they'd think she was stranger than ever. Aspen sighed. She kicked at the ground with the tip of her trainer. You said you were going to wait for me. You said. Outside the empty glassless window, Aspen could hear the rain falling. It matched her morose mood perfectly. I should have known, she told herself with a sigh. Althea had told her herself in her own words. She couldn't be trusted. She was and always had been a liar. Several days later, the summer holidays came to a close. Is this near the ending? Because I just started a new video. Don't do this to me. Aspen's parents returned home, smiling and suntanned from their trip abroad, and Aspen greeted them with warm hugs and reassurances that yes, she was all right, and yes, she had eaten all the lasagna. Aspen didn't try to go back to Miss Lee's house. She knew there was no point. Penny would never have let her go outside so late, and even if Aspen had tried to sneak out, she would have been caught. Penny was, in addition to being an incorrigible warrior, a light sleeper. Even if she had gone to Miss Lee's house, Aspen doubted Althea would have been there. Althea herself said that she and Aspen might not have been able to see one another after she had uncovered the truth, though honestly, Aspen felt more in the dark than ever before. She didn't know what truth she'd managed to uncover exactly, but the vagueness made her uneasy. Despite that, she decided to let the subject drop. She'd probably never see Althea again. Althea had disappeared. Althea had left a hole where she had once been, like a ladder running through a pair of tights, but Aspen was sure this hole would eventually repair itself. Time had a tendency of healing old wounds. Soon she would be so busy she wouldn't have any spare moments to spend wondering about Althea. It was time to start going to college. She was going to see Pippa and Valkii again. It had been a little over a week since Aspen had last seen Pippa and Valkii, and she was a touch anxious. Valkii might have phoned to apologize, but Pippa had remained disconcertingly stony-lipped, and Aspen knew just how well Pippa could keep grudges. Yes, you've told us that like 5 times. Aspen didn't want to be on the receiving end of her ill temper. Not now she'd embarked on a new phase of her life, college. In a few years, presuming she'd passed her A-levels, she'd go to university, and then she'd have to move away from home. She really was becoming an adult. The little baby Althea, meanwhile, had never had the chance. In a sense, Aspen supposed she was fortunate. Life was something to be thankful for, and she had spent far too much time wishing she could pass that privilege off to somebody else. Well, Aspen decided enough was enough. She only had one life, and she intended to make the most of it, no matter how scary it was. That Monday morning, on the 3rd of September, Aspen found herself sitting in her form room waiting for her teacher to arrive. Though college was supposedly a big jump from secondary school, at least she didn't need to wear Graham's ugly blue blazer anymore, the classroom itself didn't look all that different to Aspen's previous classrooms. There were several desks and chairs for the students, with a larger desk for the teacher near the front. There was a whiteboard, a smartboard, and what looked like an old projector. Students from years gone by had carved messages into the desks or scrawled them in blue biro. Aspen let her fingers trail over these names, her brow furrowed. As she examined her desk, she thought back to her time spent with Althea. She wasn't sure if it had really happened or if she dreamed it. That kiss, in particular, felt like something vague and hazy, a daydream that had impressed itself upon her as she lay in bed at night. Still, unclear though it was, Aspen could clearly remember those lips against her own. Althea's mouth had tasted of vanilla ice cream. Vanilla had been Althea's favourite flavour of ice cream. If Althea really was a ghost or a spirit or some kind of mysterious creature that defied explanation, then how had she been able to eat that ice cream? Eating seemed like a hopelessly mundane activity. It didn't compute with what little about Althea Aspen knew. Then again, Aspen knew precious little about Althea to begin with. But she did know what her kisses tasted like, once she'd eaten vanilla ice cream. Aspen's face flushed. She shifted in her chair and glanced out the window at the hedges and the trees that grew on the fringe of the college campus. Aspen was one of the first people to arrive in her classroom. There were 10 minutes until form started, the very first getting to know you session at school. That would probably take around an hour. The teacher would probably ask everyone to introduce themselves and give a brief talk about their hobbies and interests. To Aspen, the thought was excruciating. She had always hated being put on the spot. What in the world could she say? Hello, I'm Aspen and I might be able to see dead people? Sure, that would go down well. Not. It was as Aspen was wondering this, nibbling at her lower lip, that the door opened. She lifted her head. There, standing in the doorway, was Pippa, flanked by Valkii. When Aspen saw Pippa, her mouth fell open into a small ring. So they were in the same form class, and Valkii too, by the looks of things. What were the odds? Aspen ducked her head shyly. She wasn't sure if Pippa was going to blank her or not. Maybe if Pippa was still angry, it would be better if she did blank her. Being ignored was better than being openly insulted or scorned. And yet, to Aspen's surprise... Hey Aspen. Pippa was walking up to her. The red-headed girl looked unusually tense and awkward. She ran a hand through her red curls and shifted from foot to foot, frowning. I was talking to Valkii a little this morning, and I know I was kind of shitty to you at our sleepover. I was hurt and upset that you blew up at me, but maybe I kind of deserved it, just a little. I mean, I tried to force you to go back into that creepy house, and then I pushed you, and your phone. How is your phone, by the way? Completely broken. I took it to the store, but they couldn't fix it. That's a bummer. I'm sorry. It's fine, Aspen drew a flat, silvery device from her pocket and gave Pippa what she hoped was a reassuring smile. My parents were in a good mood after the cruise and they bought me a new one. Oh, is that the newest Samsung? Maybe, I'm not sure. I think it was expensive. It must have been, that's a really good model. Pippa smiled excitably, her previous hesitation gone as she seized upon something they could talk about. I really want that phone too, but I don't have any money. If only my parents were as generous as yours. Her parents weren't being generous, really. Aspen's old phone got broken, and we all know whose fault that was. What can I say? I don't know my own strength sometimes. I'd say you don't know when to quit. But everything worked out, right? Aspen even managed to get a new phone out of it, and a really good phone too. Who knows, maybe it's a good thing I pushed her. I wouldn't go quite that far. I would. I'd do more than explore a creepy old house to get a new phone, let me tell you. I'd willingly break one of my arms or sell a kidney. Yeah, I'm sure you would. I would, no joke. Aspen looked between Pippa and Valkii and found a small smile rising to her lips. It was strange to think that she'd been so worried Pippa wouldn't make amends with her. She shouldn't have been so paranoid. Pippa, for all her faults and flaws, was still her friend. They'd been friends since they were little children. Little enough to fit inside the draper's washing machine. I said you had one more. Many times, actually, probably. They had a bond that couldn't be broken that easily. Not by smashed phones or angry red-faced arguments. Aspen exhaled, her eyelashes downturned. Maybe things wouldn't be so bad after all. This whole time she'd been worrying for nothing. She'd thought, during the last moonlit isolated nights of the summer holidays, that she was all alone. Now she was relieved to find out that she'd been wrong. She still had her friends. Althea had been nothing more than a fleeting dream. Yeah, sorry you have all your mundane friends back. Althea, though she had seemed so real when perched on Miss Lee's old washing machine, now faded into non-existence when exposed to the light of day. She was like one of those old photographs that could only be developed in the dark. Take the film into the light and everything would be ruined. All the magic destroyed, exposed. It was Pippa with her pink cheeks and Valkii with her sharp angles who were undeniably solid and real. They were part of Aspen's life and would continue to be so for a few years at least. Althea, meanwhile, was not. She never had been. In her new form room, in her new college, Althea had never felt more distant and far away. As Aspen pondered this, the classroom door opened. In walked a woman with blonde hair piled high on her head, wearing jangly earrings and a long shawl. "Hello, everyone," the woman trilled with a very red smile. "My name is Sarah Callow. I'll be your form teacher for these 2 years at Coast College. Of course, you're not children anymore, and we're not in school, so you don't need to call me Miss Callow. In fact, I'd rather you didn't. It makes me feel so old. You can just call me Sarah, and I'll call you by your first names too. Now, I'm a bit scatterbrained, and I'm not very good with names, so it might take me some time to get it right, but please bear with me. So, is everybody here?" Sarah glanced about the classroom, her lipstick-smeared lips pursing. "It looks like we're all present and accounted for, apart from a few gaps here and there. Well, never mind. It's already past 9, and I think we should get cracking if we want to introduce everybody. So, I've told you who I am, but... oh no." Aspen groaned and sank down in her seat. She knew what was coming next. It was inevitable. "I don't know who you are yet. That's why I'd like to take some time to get to know each other. If you make it interesting enough, I might be able to remember your names quicker. That's 2 birds with 1 stone. So, does anybody want to start, or should I work my way through the register?" Aspen tried to sink even lower into her chair, away from Sarah's watchful gaze. Pippa, who was sitting next to Aspen, sniggered and gave her a dig in the ribs. "You're gonna have to talk about yourself eventually, Aspen." "But I don't want to." "Why not? Nobody's going to bite you." "Yes, but they could always laugh at me." "Why would our new classmates laugh at you?" "Most of the people in here went to Graham with us anyway." "I know, but, I mean..." Aspen twisted her fingers into an anxious pretzel on her lap. "I'm not very interesting." "I think you're interesting." "Really?" "Sure, why don't you tell them about doing ballet?" "But I quit." "Then tell them about the washing machine incident. That'll make you stick in their minds." "Like I was stuck inside the washing machine, you mean?" "That's right." Pippa chortled and Aspen sighed. "I don't really think that's the impression I want to give." "Then why don't you talk about Miss Lee?" Aspen's shoulders stiffened. "It took months for people in Graham to stop asking me about that. I'd rather everybody forgot about it." "Then how about..." But before Pippa could reply, the door to the classroom opened. "Sorry if I'm a little late. My dad was meant to drop me off on the way to work, but there were some troubles with his car." "Oh, don't worry, it's no trouble at all, dear. It's only the first day and we haven't introduced ourselves yet. Although, since you've just come in, why don't you do the honors? Do you want to introduce yourself to the class first?" "Well, this is a little sudden, but..." Aspen blinked. She recognized that voice. "It's Charlotte, not Althea." It sounded almost eerily familiar, though there was something slightly off about it. Maybe that was because she'd grown accustomed to hearing it echo around the walls of Miss Lee's empty, abandoned home. Slowly, Aspen lifted her head. She stared. There, standing in the doorway, a messenger bag slung over her shoulder, was Althea. But she didn't look very much like Althea at the moment. Her golden curls were tied back in an almost disappointingly ordinary ponytail, and though she'd opted for white again, she was wearing a simple shirt and a pair of shorts. Sorry, I accidentally needed to cough, and I still need to cough. She didn't look like a ghost. I'm gonna try stifle it. Don't think I can. Neither did she look like a phantom. Alright. She was really, truly real. But she wasn't the Althea Aspen had grown accustomed to. Who was she? Althea glanced about the classroom, examining her new classmates. Her eyes lingered a little longer than necessary on Aspen, until Aspen had to duck her head, her face blushing. A thin smile captured the corners of Althea's lips. She laughed, shaking her head. If you want to know a little about me, I'm afraid there's not much to tell, but my name's Charlotte, and I like making up stories. I hope we can all be friends." I mean, I fucking called it. I super called it. Oh, I like making up stories. If that was me, if I was Aspen, I would completely just, like, cut her off. As, like, even if I found her, like, attractive and, like, enticing, etc., I would cut her off at that point. I'd be like, I could never trust a word you say. Like, when can I know you're telling the truth? I don't know. I don't know. And it feels a bit, like, disrespectful to be like, to take on someone's dead child and make it your own story. Like, I don't know. There is something that rubs me the wrong way about that one. Oh, right. Hey, Aspen, what would you do if I disappeared? Huh? Aspen turned to look at Charlotte, her brow furrowed. The two girls were sitting together on a bus which was populated with ballerinas in various stages of training, all of them students of Miss Russian Lady's exalted academy. The grey, seemingly endless stretch of the A641 rumbled beneath the tyres of the bus as it shuttled the girls to their final destination. York. Aspen had never been to York. She hadn't been to many places really, but she was cautiously optimistic about her trip. At least she would have been, had the strain of a future performance not rested upon her small shoulders. The girls of Miss Russian Ladies were going to take part in a performance at Friargate Theatre. All the ballet mistresses' girls were to attend, from the youngest in the junior class to the oldest in the seniors. Miss Russian Lady had a lot of students, and she needed 2 buses to contain them all. The girls inside Aspen's bus ranged between the ages of 5 to 18, and the 18-year-olds looked very mature indeed with their elaborate hairstyles and sweeping makeup. These girls were all clustered together, devoutly ignoring the younger ones, reading magazines, listening to music, and talking about their upcoming A-levels. To Aspen, this was all very strange and new. Aspen was so young she still found it hard to distinguish ages, and these willowy girls seemed just as worldly as her own parents, or Miss Russian Lady herself. Aspen couldn't imagine getting that old. It didn't seem possible. How would her legs get that long? Would a wicked, nefarious demon creep into her room at night and stretch her on a rack? Ooh, what child thinks that? No. Bad. It didn't bear thinking about. Neither did their upcoming performance of the Nutcracker. The older girls from the senior class had been assigned the main roles. The girls from the junior classes were part of the Corps de Ballet, shunted off to the back of the stage, where they could cause the least amount of embarrassment. If Aspen had been old enough to apply a little logic, she would have realized she was hardly the star attraction of this event. Nobody would be looking at her, save her parents. She didn't have anything to worry about, but Penny, being Penny, had booked tickets for this show months in advance. Though it clashed with a Leeds versus Everton football match, James had been born in Leeds and he was an avid fan. James had tried to wriggle out of it. Does Aspen really need both of us to be there for her pen? But Penny had been firm, and so she fucking should have been. Your child doing a performance is more important than watching a football match you could watch once you'd recorded it or something. And I know it's not the same, you'd have to shy away from everyone telling you the scores, but it's still more important that you're there for the important moments for your child, just saying. Aspen supposed she should have been happy her father was going to watch her, but she knew he'd rather stay at home watching TV, and she knew her pathetic dancing would never be able to compete with the thrill and excitement of a football match. Not that Aspen found football all that thrilling. It was nerve-wracking, really. What if she made a mistake? She didn't want to let her father down. Aspen conjured up dozens of nightmare scenarios, each one more embarrassing than the last. In her mind's eye, she tripped over her feet, fell off the stage, caught on fire. She didn't think her tutu was as flammable as the gauze costumes the dancers wore in the 19th century, but Miss Russian Lady's ghoulish stories had stayed with her. Aspen was so aggrieved she'd spent much of the trip biting her fingernails. So lost in her anxiety was she hardly heard Charlotte's question. "What did you say?" Aspen asked, still half submerged in her own nightmares, and Charlotte sighed. "I said, Dozy," she said, flicking Aspen's forehead. "What would you do if I disappeared?" "Disappeared?" Aspen asked, pressing one hand against her aching forehead. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if I turned into foam, like the Little Mermaid." "The Little Mermaid didn't turn into foam," Aspen countered weakly, but she wasn't so sure. Ariel hadn't dissolved at the end of the movie she had seen, but Charlotte seemed to know much more about the world than she did, despite being only a handful of months older. "She didn't in the Disney movie, Dumbo," Charlotte said, her eyes shining with that all-knowing glint, "but she did in the real story." "What real story?" "The one in the book my dad gave me. It was filled with fairy tales, but none of them had happy endings. The match girl died, and the tin soldier burned to death, and the Little Mermaid turned into foam." "That isn't true," Aspen said, more uneasily still. "You're lying." "No, I'm not. Not about this. I can show you the book if you want. It had pictures, too." "No, it's fine. I don't want to see it," said Aspen. I knew you wouldn't want to, cowardly custard, came Charlotte's aloof retort. Maybe Aspen was a coward. She quivered enough whenever she had to perform on stage. The mere thought of their upcoming performance was enough to make her feel sick. All the same, Aspen didn't think she was wrong for loving The Little Mermaid, but her version of it and not the horrible one Charlotte spoke of, where the mermaid died. Where did your dad get that book anyway? Aspen asked. Those fairy tales don't sound right. Oh, my dad has a lot of old books. He owns a second-hand bookstore. Really? You don't believe me? I don't know. Every time Aspen asks Charlotte about her life, she receives a new answer, each more fanciful than the last. Once, Charlotte had told her that her dad was a sultan, and another, she'd claimed he was a scientist who was going to cure cancer. Aspen had believed her at first, until Penny had squashed that idea into dirt. Paul Moby, a scientist? Don't make me laugh. You need to have brains to do that, Aspen dear. Compared to being a sultan or a scientist, owning a second-hand bookstore sounded like a far more reasonable and realistic occupation. Well, it doesn't matter what you think. That's besides the point, Charlotte said, arms folded. I want to know what you do. About what? If I stopped showing up to ballet class and you never saw me again, would you be sad? Charlotte's eyes bored into Aspen's. She was clearly waiting for a response, but Aspen wasn't sure what to say. Would she feel sad? It was hard to know. Aspen supposed Charlotte was her friend in a sense. She was the only girl at Miss Russian ladies who spoke to her, and she would always chivied her along when she was down in the dumps. It had been Charlotte who'd washed Aspen's knee when she'd fallen over during practice, and it was Charlotte who'd picked Aspen out as a partner when they had to perform warm-ups. Now it was Charlotte who had chosen to sit with Aspen on the bus when nobody else would. But conversely, Charlotte could be very cruel. She would trip Aspen up in class and stick hairpins into her scalp and give her Chinese burns. She told Aspen outrageous lies, and Aspen was gullible enough to believe them. Sometimes Charlotte whispered dirty words in Aspen's ear, and Aspen, wide-eyed and innocent, would repeat them to her mother. Aspen didn't know how she would feel if Charlotte disappeared, like a conjurer's assistant, but she knew perfectly well how her mother would say. Good riddance to bad rubbish. I don't know how I'd feel, was all Aspen could muster, her little face taut with the sheer effort of thinking. Why, do you want to quit ballet? I don't know if I have a choice. What do you mean? It's difficult. Charlotte played with her fingers, which were linked together on her lap. My parents haven't been getting along well lately. They're always fighting. My parents fight too, about the dirty dishes and the laundry. That's nice, Charlotte said. My parents fight about Debbie in Slow. Debbie in Slow? What's that? My dad's girlfriend. Mum said he was having an affair, and then she threw a vase at him. It still had some flowers in it. Aspen stared at Charlotte, her expression uncomprehending. Debbie? Slow? Affair? Aspen could hardly make sense of all these words. She'd never heard of a Slow before, or affairs, and she'd never met anybody called Debbie either. For all Aspen knew, Slow could be a made-up fantasy place, yet another product of Charlotte's wicked imagination. But Charlotte sounded so unusually serious, Aspen didn't think that was the case this time. This was real. Well, it has nothing to do with me, Charlotte said, kicking the seat in front of her dispassionately. I don't care what Mum or Dad do. They can fight all they want. I tried to hide in my room, but my room might not be my room for much longer. What do you mean? Dad wants to move in with Debbie. He asked me if I'd come with him. And what did you say? It doesn't matter what I said. I don't have a choice. I'm only a kid, and nobody cares what I want. Charlotte turned her head and looked out the window. The sky was grey and cloudy, and the road was flat for miles around. It was hardly the most inspiring of scenery. The young Charlotte sighed, her fingers tracing shapes against the grimy window. Though she said she didn't care what her parents did, Aspen was unconvinced. Charlotte was an adept liar, but this was one of the least convincing fibs she's told. It was obvious she did care. Otherwise, she wouldn't have mentioned it. Aspen didn't know anything about Slow or affairs, but she did know Charlotte, and she could tell the other girl was upset. She wanted to comfort Charlotte, like Charlotte had comforted her when she had grazed her knee, but there weren't any taps on the bus, and she could hardly run Charlotte under cold water for 5 seconds. She didn't think it would help. Emotional distress, Aspen discovered, was much harder to kiss better than a scratch on the knee. Hey, Aspen. While Aspen dithered, helplessly indecisive, Charlotte glanced at her from over her shoulder. She frowned, her brow furrowed, and said, You wouldn't forget me, would you? Aspen had no idea how to comfort Charlotte, but at least this was a query she could answer with certainty. With all the confidence she could muster, where was that confidence whenever she had to dance? Aspen said, "No, I wouldn't." "You promise?" "I promise. Even if I look different?" "Even so," Aspen said with a purposeful nod of her head. "I could never forget you." "Good," Charlotte said, a self-satisfied smile on her face. "Then, if you're so sure, why don't we swear by it?" Swear? Aspen knew a lot about swearing by now after being subjugated to Charlotte's colourful vocabulary. What kind of books had her father been giving her anyway? And she wasn't so sure about this proposition. "If we swear, my mum will get mad at me." "No, no, no," Charlotte said crossly. "I don't mean it like that, dummy." Again, Charlotte flicked Aspen on the forehead, and again, Aspen winced. "I meant we should make a pinky promise, then we'll never forget each other, even if I have to live in stinky old Slough. We'll always remember each other then." "Always." Aspen swallowed. She didn't think she needed any particular incentive to remember Charlotte. She was already unforgettable, with her bright smiles and her casual cruelty. Part of Aspen was afraid of Charlotte, but another part of her was enraptured, completely and utterly. Charlotte's father might have sold scruffy books for a living, but Charlotte was the real storyteller. She could enthrall Aspen with nothing but her words, and Aspen knew she would never forget her. Still, Charlotte seemed determined to mark their agreement in some way. And a pinky promise was far less painful than all the Chinese burns Charlotte had administered in the past. And so, after a small pause, "Okay," Aspen said, holding out her little finger. "Let's promise." "Good." Charlotte linked her finger with Aspen's, a small smile playing about her lips. "Just make sure you don't break it, okay? If you do, I'll never forgive you." "Never?" "Not ever." Charlotte shifted a little closer to Aspen. There was barely any space between the two girls, their fingers entwined, eyes locked together. Charlotte's eyes, though they were pale blue, suddenly looked very intense, like flickering lights on a Christmas tree. Aspen felt small prickles of fear run up and down her spine. In the background, she could hear the tires grinding over the road, girls engaged in conversation. The bus trundled down the road, shaking Aspen left and right like a pinball, but still her finger remained linked with Charlotte's. She couldn't draw her away. It was as though she had fallen entirely under the girl's spell. Okay, so it's all a bit of a jumble, honestly. It's all a bit of a jumble. So, okay, so what, they were like 6 or something when they were talking just then? It was something like that, right? And then, they made a pinky promise, and then what, this girl just like hung on to that and held it against her and decided to play with her a bit because she was mad she forgot her, even though this happened literally like when they were 6. Let's look at this. So she was listening to the cure, less on its narrative and characters and more on establishing a general mood. Alright. Yes, this person is from the UK, fair enough, cool. Me too. Relatively familiar with this country, yep. It does rain a lot in England. It's often voted one of the worst places to live in the UK, okay. The Ebby, someone called Ebby made this. Alright, fair enough. She's just like mad that she didn't remember her. Okay, well, I mean, as it goes, I hope they don't get together. I still hope that unless she vows to stop lying and actually keeps to it. By the way, people generally don't do that. If someone's been lying for a while, especially if they're a pathological liar, they're not just gonna stop lying. It doesn't work like that. Oh, and if someone says that they don't lie to you, but they still lie to other people, it probably means they're still lying to you. If someone should stop lying, they should stop lying, full stop. Just saying. But anyway, yes, that was a mess. It was a mess, but I applaud Ebby's, I applaud her passion, and I applaud that she actually did this. She got it out. Honestly, I kind of feel like the LGBT aspect was maybe not, shouldn't have been done. I don't know. It kind of felt like tacked on a little bit, and it wasn't very healthy because Charlotte was just lying all the time. I tried to stroke my cat, but I accidentally touched her tooth. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's fine. It's fine. I enjoyed it because I'm from the UK, I feel like. There was a lot for me to enjoy about it, and I enjoyed being able to go off on some tangents because the story afforded me such opportunities. But there were some things about the writing that bothered me a little bit, but again, I don't begrudge the writer for that. In fact, I sympathize with them heavily. It's fucking hard. It's really hard to write. It actually is. And I'm actually really proud of this person for getting this out and doing whatever they wanted with it. Even if maybe I didn't agree with the LGBT part of it. Like, that sounds really fucking weird when I say that. I'm gay. I just don't know if it had a place in it. It didn't. I don't know. Maybe it did. I don't know. Maybe it did. Maybe I'm just saying that because I don't like unhealthy relationships. I mean, I do, but not like this. I'm not. Okay, I'm a very complicated person. I'm just gonna stop there. Anyway, this is Rituals in the Dark, a kinetic visual novel. I'm sorry. I just hit the mic. And yeah, if you want to check it out, I say go check it out, go buy it, because, you know, people who make these types of games, they need support. Like, that sounds really bad again. I feel like because I'm tired, I'm choosing all the wrong types of words. They need support in the way of, if they want to keep doing their passion projects, they probably need funding, and, you know, the more money they get from other people from their passion projects, the more they can continue on with more passion projects and maybe spend less time doing like some kind of work thing that they have to do. And one of my cats wants to go out, so I'm gonna have to stop it here. I will see you in whatever I play next. Bye.